Good morning, it's Dr. Rutledge, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about pain. Maybe you want to turn it off now. It's the touchy subject, and it's a difficult subject. It's paradoxical in that the patients who come to see me now are mostly in pain. They're suffering. They're suffering from obesity and diabetes. They're suffering psychologically and socially because we judge people on their looks and their actions. And so a heavy person, and particularly a heavy woman, and so it's worth saying here that the vast majority of people who turn to weight loss surgery are female. And the reason, I think, in part is because our society, not just in the United States now, but around the world, judges people on our looks. And we judge women more severely on their looks than we do men. So you can see sometimes very divergent looking people who might be judged attractive or unattractive together as couples. Sometimes the a man may be judged less attractive with a very attractive partner, yet the arrangement seems more acceptable. So it's a problem. We judge people on their looks. We judge people on their wealth and other things. And patients who come to me are suffering both physically. They cannot enjoy activities the way they might. They cannot enjoy a variety of things in life because of their weight and the associated comorbidities, the illnesses that go along with obesity. And so when they come to me, they're seeking relief from the pain of their suffering. And this is then paradoxical. If I would do anything other than to console them, to be compassionate to them in their suffering and help them unconditionally. Yet I have some bad news to pass on. And I think it will make common sense when you think about it, because we'd like to describe obesity in many ways as a correlation, a similar problem as drug addiction. Now, immediately, I think I need to apologize for saying something like that, because an obese person, we don't think necessarily has a character defect. And oftentimes we judge the drug addict, the alcoholic, as someone who has a character defect. They have weak willpower. And we also then say that the alcoholic who cannot stop drinking, the cocaine addict or the smoker who can't stop smoking, taking cocaine, is a bad person. That not only are they suffering from an illness, but they have a character flaw. They are imperfect. They are a bad person. And so I want to talk about those topics because they are often then applied to my patients, and they feel sad, they're embarrassed, they're upset. And when I consult with them and do an online consultation, oftentimes they will tend to hide some of their food choices because they are embarrassed. They think they are being judged, and they judge themselves as being weak or bad or hopeless or helpless. And these kinds of terms are then attached by their friends and family, and then by themselves against themselves. So what we'd like to do is tell you some of the latest research in addiction medicine, some of the physiology of the brain. Particularly, we'll be talking about some of the chemicals in the brain, particularly dopamine, but also maybe we might talk about serotonin, oxytocin, some of the narcotic and cannabinoids, so the, excuse me, some of these other chemicals in the brain that make us who we are and control, in a large part, our actions. And so they take out of our control, in part, or in some cases, our ability to make our own decisions. So let's talk about that a little bit. when people come to me and we talk about things, there are a variety of issues: reflux, obesity itself, diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, other kinds of things that they will come to me to chat about in consultation with their own local doctor. One of the things that often happens is we'll discuss these things, and my advice is often very simplistic, embarrassingly so, because oftentimes you can summarize what I tell them in large part is simply eat a better, healthier diet. Well, it's a good thing I don't charge for that. In other words, almost everyone knows that before they call. Okay. In other words, if I say, eat a healthier diet, that's your solution, and then hang up, the problem is that's often unstated is, I knew that. I already got that. And so then comes the point of me to kind of interrogate them a little bit and say, you know that, right? And they go, yeah. And let's say, for example, it's common for many of my patients to say around 8 p.m. at night after the first Netflix show is over, they will get a craving that they often have trouble resisting to eat some food. And oftentimes it's not very healthy. From what they tell me, in fact, it's often maybe the worst possible things you can imagine. So chocolate, potato chips, popcorn, candy bars, ice cream. And they will say this often to me quite sheepishly and in an embarrassed way. But here's the interesting thing. Many of my patients are very educated, very intelligent, very successful in life. Excuse me. And so I interrogate them. I say, well, why do you think you do that? You know that's not a good choice. You want to lose weight, get rid of your diabetes, feel better, be less depressed, play more with your children and your family. You want all these things, and you know that those food choices are bad, yet you can't stop. Okay. And they say yes, and they say, well, I just, and oftentimes it kind of runs out. And many times they think badly of themselves. They don't often say it, but sometimes it will come out. They might say something like, I'm weak, I can't do it, or whatever. But I want to stop for a second and turn back our judgment back to some research and physiology, because I want to point out the two different people in that person. Let's imagine that I want to exercise. Let's imagine that I want to stop drinking, stop smoking. And I want to stop doing that, or I want to start doing something. I want to read more, exercise more, run a marathon, swim the ocean, whatever it is. If I want to do those things, excuse me, when I talk to myself, and yet I cannot do them, or I find I cannot do them, or I want to do them in a moment, and yet don't do them. What's going on? What's happening in this moment? And so I want to stop for a second and hold that question in your mind. And I want to talk to you about breathing. If I tell you to hold your breath for a few moments, say 10 seconds, like we could do it now, let's hold our breath for 10 seconds, 10 seconds, no problem, right? Because we know that we are the master. We are the king or the queen of our bodies. We tell it what to do. We, the personality, the person who is us, is our body, and we tell our body what to do, and then we do it. There is no separation of church and state, so to speak. There's no difference between the king and the parliament. On the other hand, that breathing example can be extended. Let's imagine that we ask you to hold your breath for 10 minutes. Not going to happen, right? You understand that. If I say hold your breath for 10 minutes, you know you cannot do that. Why? And what I want to point out is there are two of you inside you. It's not just you that I'm talking to. There's somebody else in there with you, a more primitive version of yourself. something that has existed in the animal kingdom for a long time. We can go back to find the breathing component in brains of very undeveloped animals. If you believe in the development of animals through evolution, many, maybe millions of years ago, there were animals similar to us, but without as much brain development. Say, for example, a lizard or a snake. They can't talk. They can't listen to podcasts. And those animals are different from us, but similar to us in some way. So for example, right now, they have a scanner that we can put on our heads, that is the humans, or on an animal like a rat or even a very primitive animal like a snake, and we can watch the activity in the brain. So for example, as I'm talking now, if we had a scanner on our heads, we could see behind my left ear, the part of the brain light up as I begin to speak. And you can actually now almost begin to see the words form as the individual cells light up to make speech. Similarly, as you listen, we can watch the parts of the brain light up as you listen. And so that's in the outer white cortex of the brain. That's what's thinking and talking to each other and listening right now. And that's one part of the brain, and that's one part of us. But there's another part of us, a more primitive part of the brain. So if the outer brain is the cortex, as we go deeper and deeper inside, we're also going back hundreds of thousands and millions of years in the path of evolution of animals, from an individual cell up to flies and insects, and then reptiles, and then mammals, and then us. And over that time, the brain kind of grows out and differentiates. And you may know the outer white cortex is what makes a lot of our thinking. It's our talking. But more primitive parts of our brain is in part responsible for other things. So for example, if we are busy listening to a podcast, watching TV, or taking a walk, or whatever, another part of our brain is busy breathing for us. And that part of the brain is in the area of the brainstem. And that part of the brainstem runs the body without us. That part of the brain is a second part of us. Even though it's part of us, it's also different from us. It doesn't talk to us and say, by the way, I'm taking a couple of extra breaths because you're walking faster, you're jogging, you're excited, or you're angry. It just does it. And when there is a conflict, the primitive part, the brain stem, always wins. You always lose when you go up against it. Now, the brain stem, the part of the breathing part of the brain, is pretty liberal. He says he will let you drive the car sometimes, but many times he will say, I'm taking over. You're an idiot. It's time for me, the primitive brainstem, the brainstem that's been here for 1,000,000 years. I'm the snake brain, the lizard brain. I'm in charge. And so, for example, when you start to say, walk a little bit faster, your body will recognize down to minute details, the pH, the acid base, the oxygen, carbon dioxide in your blood, and will start to have the heart beat faster. You don't do that. They do that. Or you might break out in a sweat if someone points a gun at you. You're not in charge of that. So this other brain does things and is controlled by things and is different from you. Now that's good in many ways, because we don't want to have to be thinking about whether we want to inject more acid into the stomach to digest dinner. We don't want to have to think about whether we need to breathe more times or pump extra blood or relax or close our eyes and blink when something is getting near our eyes, things like that. Those are automatic. And so they control a lot of our lives that we don't think about. Let me tell you that they also control the desires and timing of when and what we eat. And we now know some of the systems that are in charge of not just breathing, but taste and sensation and fear and other things. And many of these things are not us. It's a part of us, but it's not us. And they can be damaged, destroyed, subverted, perverted by things that we do. So now let's go back to that conundrum, the mystery. A very intelligent woman calls me. She's struggling with obesity and diabetes. And at 8 o'clock at night, she wants somewhere, an urge comes into her mind to eat junk food. Potato chips, Doritos, candy bar, whatever it is. And she knows also she's struggling with obesity. She has shortness of breath. Maybe she's had a problem with a friend or a lover. And so she's desperately wanting and realizing she should eat a healthier diet, yet she can't, even though she's intelligent, a good person, she cannot control, and she notices she ends up eating junk food and calls me. What if we could explain that, make her be found innocent of that transgression, and also help to fight it? So that's what we're talking about this morning. What we'd like to point out is that we can subvert the healthy system in our brain by becoming a drug addict. So if we take cocaine and give it to a person frequently, let's suppose you live in a crack house and you say, I'm not going to become a drug addict, yet over and over again, it's given to you or slipped into your food or something like that, or it's given to you against your will, your body will adapt. And basically, the dopaminergic pathway, that is a bunch of nerves in the brain, gets stimulated by cocaine. Cocaine turns on this pleasure pathway of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical. Dopamine is turned on by that chemical, cocaine in this example, and it means you get a burst of pleasure, pure, unadulterated, positive pleasure. The cells in your brain feel pleasure, and in response, they make you feel good. But there's a side effect, which is when you see that pleasure more than once or several times, the number of receptors for dopamine goes down. So that means to get the same positive, joyous pleasure, you need more drug. And oftentimes, the usual pleasures of life are blunted because there are fewer dopamine receptors. So now you live a life without the dopamine stimulus. You have a life without the cocaine, becomes much sadder, much more anxiety-filled, much more depressing. Because of the cocaine addiction, because of the frequent use of cocaine, the dopamine sensation system has been turned down, and now you get less pleasure from a sunny day, from a hug, from a smile, from an apple, because that ain't cocaine. Okay. Now, to get that same amount of pleasure, you need more cocaine. You need another dose of cocaine. And the body again sees more cocaine and says, oh, okay, I got it. I'm going to turn down my receptors even further. So you need more cocaine. All of this happens in the primitive part of the brain. That's lizard brain. It's designed to work for food and some of the primitive needs of our body. Yet it can be subverted and destroyed and damaged. Think cocaine, narcotic, alcohol, nicotine addiction. Okay? Now, let me tell you that in careful studies in humans and animals, that sugar is more addictive in turning on the dopaminergic pathway than cocaine. Salt, salty foods, more addictive than cocaine. Fat, greasy foods, more addictive than cocaine. Every day, you and I wake up in a crack house. McDonald's, Ben and Jerry's, all of these other companies make money on addicting you to salt, sugar, and fat. And especially if you're obese, but probably all of us, are in some way having our dopaminergic pathway manipulated to make money for giant corporations who want to sell us chocolate, cookies, potato chips, crackers, Doritos, Big Macs, French fries, milkshakes, etc. You and I are addicted in various amounts to those foods. That addiction occurs at the level of the amygdala and the brainstem in the primitive snake brain. Now, that's the bad news. So we're facing quite a challenge. As you may know, getting off narcotics, getting off alcohol, quitting smoking, none of that is easy. All of it is painful. So when I talk to patients and I say, we want to get you clean of the food addiction to salt, sugar, and fat, I don't, quote, sugarcoat it. I say it's going to be painful. To get free of narcotic addiction is painful. As a trauma surgeon for 20 years, I took care of many narcotic addicts, cocaine addicts, and alcoholics. Car wrecks, gunshot wounds, stabbing, beatings, all kinds of terrible, monstrous things. It's not easy to get off narcotics. It's not a fun thing to do. It's devastatingly hard. Getting clean from eating junk food, from eating a poor diet is not easy. It is painful, but it's worth it. We'll talk about how to do that more in some of our future videos. Thanks for listening.